Imagine it's summertime in childhood and you're going out to the local pond or community swimming pool to go for a swim. And you jump in the water and decide you're gonna dive, you're gonna swim underwater across to the other side. So you come up and you do two things, right? You catch your breath and you look around to make sure you know where you're headed. And when you go underwater, in case, say, the water's murky because it's a pond or it's full of people's legs because it's a community swimming pool, you want to know where you're headed. So you not only catch your breath before you stick your head back under the water, but you look around to get a clear sense of where you're going. Before the deep dive, you get that clarity, right? My guess is you've been there before in countless places of swimming, a hotel swimming pool, the community pool in your town, or grandma and grandpa's pond in their back 40. The thing that's the same, though, is that motion not just of catching your breath, but of getting a clear glimpse of where you're headed before you put your head back under the water. I mention this because in a very important sense, the storytelling about Jesus in the Gospels does the same thing at this important turning point before the journey that takes us toward the cross of Jesus. There's this moment in Matthew and Mark and Luke, we're going to hear it this coming Sunday from Luke's telling, where Jesus goes up on a high mountaintop with some of his closest disciples, and there's this moment of utter revelation of God's presence. Jesus' appearance is transformed and his clothes start becoming dazzling white and he starts shining like radiating light. And to make it even stranger and somehow more wonderful, these two figures from ancient Israel's past, Moses and Elijah, appear. Who knows how they recognize them? Name tags? I don't know, props, but there they are, Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus, and some of Jesus' closest disciples get to witness this moment. And if that weren't enough, a voice from heaven comes speaking out of a cloud and says about this Jesus, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." And after that, in a moment, it's all over. And not only are those first disciples left shaking their heads wondering, what have we just lived through? What was this all about? For 2,000 years now, the followers of Jesus have been left with a story like this going, what is the point of this? It's so unusual. It's so different from so many of the other stories of Jesus where he looks and acts like an ordinary human being, because for whatever else we say about him, Jesus is also an ordinary human being who is also the Son of God, but also eats and sleeps and gets tired. So much of Jesus' ordinary everyday discourse, he's just an ordinary itinerant rabbi, right? He doesn't glow. He isn't surrounded by the presence of long dead ancient figures like Moses and Elijah. So what's going on here? I want to suggest this is something like that moment before you put your head back in the water to do the deep dive, where you get your bearings. We're at a point in the story of Jesus this coming Sunday, right before Jesus makes the conscious, intentional choice to head toward the cross. He's making his way toward the city of Jerusalem, and it will be sort of a winding journey, but Jesus is headed there knowing full well that things are going to build toward a climax, knowing full well eventually there will be a showdown, not just with the respectable religious leaders or with the Romans, but that Jesus will take on death itself and go to a cross. Jesus understands this is exactly what he's come for. This is God's way of saving and delivering the world, but Jesus is so aware of it, it's an intentional journey toward that. And for a lot of us, there's this question, why would God's Messiah go to the cross? That doesn't make sense. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe Jesus isn't the one we thought he was, because the Romans crucified plenty of people, but a respectable Messiah shouldn't get nailed to a cross. Here's Jesus showing us, yeah, I want you to know who I am, so that you understand when I go to the cross, it's not just somebody who got caught up in the vicissitudes of fate or was in the wrong place at the wrong time or made the wrong enemies with the respectable religious or political establishment. Jesus goes knowingly, full well, and this is the moment before the deep dive, before the journey toward the cross begins. Not just for Jesus to say, catch his breath, but for us to get clarity, to know where we are headed, and that it is an intentional, purposeful journey. For the followers of Jesus, this is one of those moments every year for us to catch our breath before that season that will begin next week called Lent. That is a 40-day intentional journey that points us again toward the journey toward the cross and the ways that our faith maybe needs clarifying, removing of distractions, the other things that get in the way. And with clarity and purpose, we see that's where Jesus is headed, so that's where we are headed. Not just to hear the story of the cross again, but that our lives might be shaped again by that kind of self-giving love, that we're called to be people who embody Jesus' way of the cross in our own lives too. So we need this moment, this sort of catch your breath moment, to come up, put our heads out of the water, and not just take a deep breath of air, but also make sure we are clear on where we are headed, right? If you're swimming in the pond, you want to make sure before you put your face back in that dirty, muddy water that you know what way you're pointed so you end up in the right spot and don't hit your head on the wooden pier. This is a moment for us to get clarity about where we are headed as the people of God. We are on a journey constantly with Jesus toward the cross. And yes, eventually beyond the cross to resurrection, but we are people who are not just marked with the cross on our forehead in our baptism, but that our whole lives then become cruciform, cross-shaped. That we become people who practice that same self-giving love, who lay down our lives for others as followers of Jesus, who practice Jesus' kind of servant leadership, washing the feet of disciples rather than lording over them. That we become the kind of people who practice the risky, scandalous love that Jesus does, that seeks out the lost and those who are written off as unworthy. Our whole lives are called to be following after Jesus on the way of the cross. And so that we don't get swept up into it without thinking or without realizing where we're headed, we take this moment, this Sunday, to hear about where Jesus is seen in clarity as the Son of God, and from there to go forward on the journey with Jesus before the deep dive. Join us this Sunday for that conversation, to get clarity one more time about who Jesus is and where we are headed. See you Sunday.